Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Mike and Brooker with your hosts, Mike and Brooker.
Hey, it's Mike and fucking Brooker. All right. Hey, where the fuck is our guest, Cam Josse? Where the fuck is he?
There he is.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. Now everyone can see. And Cam, hey, the lighting looks great where you are, bro. It's like you got some professional advice on how the fuck to stand.
No, believe it or not, I'm just standing by a window. I don't have one of those fancy LED ring that social media influencers use. I don't have any of that. It's just a decently sunny day. Actually, it's raining outside, but the sunlight itself is good here in Auburn, Alabama. So I'm just trying to make it work.
So how long have you been at Auburn right now?
It's my second year. So I got here January of 2023.
What was the acclimation like going from Indiana to Auburn? You and I spoke about that briefly, but like what was it like going from the different talent pool?
Ooh, yeah. That's probably the biggest difference for sure. You know, when getting into college after all the years I had in the private sector, I was ecstatic to go to the Big Ten conference where I was going to Indiana University and seeing the talent that we were going to have there. But the talent across the board, yeah, we didn't do too well at Indiana last a couple of years, I would say. So talent is subjective, I suppose. But it's been, I mean, light years different when you come down south. It really is. It's cliche. Everybody says it, but it really is. Just the type of player that you have, because culturally, football is just such an important. I mean, they talk about it being a religion down here, and it might as well be. I mean, for real, it's people are obsessed with football down here, and so my first game day in Auburn, it really was the whole tidal wave of just how much people love this freaking game down here in the SEC. It was unbelievable environment. I mean, it rivals anything I ever went to any of the NFL games I went to. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable.
How many people we talking there, Cam, for the Europeans? What is it? 50,000 people?
For the game, it's about 90,000. It's a little bit less than 90,000 that fit in our stadium. And, and then there's probably thousands more that are outside tailgating that are just watching it on their trailers and all that. I mean, it really is. They jam pack it as much as they can. And the 90,000 sound like 500,000. It's unbelievable. The environment here and Jordan-Hare Stadium here down in Auburn is known for that. Like a lot of players from other teams that go to big schools like University of Georgia or University of Alabama or wherever, they talk about our stadium and just the environment of it. And it's pretty cool. The closest thing I think in the Big Ten that I might have experienced in terms of just the way the crowd is would be probably Penn State is pretty close. Mm-hmm. Iowa in the Big Ten is an underrated stadium. That is one of those stadiums that rocks the house. And Auburn's very similar to those, but just even on a different scale. It's even more so just intense, where you can feel it in your soul when people are roaring, you know, when we make a good play, which hopefully we make more of those this year.
So what is your role there right now? What is your role and what are you trying to accomplish in your role?
Yeah, it's a really good question. My immediate role is assistant strength coach by title. So nothing exciting, nothing fancy, but within that, my boss, Dom Sitzinski, who's our assistant head coach and our head of strength conditioning, he tasked me initially with, I want you to be the liaison between the sports medicine department and our department. And at the same time, I want you to take over whenever we're asked to take part in it, take over the return to play processes for players and just help be a part of that process. So it's not like it's all us or all of the athletic trainers or sports medicine people. Here more than ever, anywhere I've been and experienced, we collaborate really, really well. Everybody talks to each other. Everybody's on the same page with things. The communication's top notch, which is great. And so I'm learning a lot about how to do that. So I was tasked with it, and it was great because coming from the private sector, you deal a lot with individualization and coming up with modifications and all that all the time. You know, you have people from, as you know, age 10 all the way to age 70 sometimes, right? It's and everywhere in between. And so that experience for me was valuable in what I'm doing now in my role. But at the same time, what I need to learn more about is the medical side and understanding the true rehab side of things. And I didn't get that as much in the private sector because we always got them mostly post rehab, post all of everything. Now they're cleared to train. We're here now. I'm in the middle of all of it. I get to see it from the day they get surgery to when they're rehabbing to what we can do along the way and the whole process, which is exactly why I wanted to come into a team setting from the private sector, was to gain that experience. And outside of that, my responsibilities are basically just trying to learn as much as I can about everything that goes into everything. So for example, we don't have a sports science person by title. And so it's almost by committee for us where we're all involved in that. So we're all involved in building the GPS reports, understanding what that is. And so specifically for me, I build that out for our skill and our mid-skill positions. And so I've had to learn how to use Power BI and all these different tools to understand data and look at some of it in different ways and try to simplify it. Because I'm not a data science person by any means, but learning how to digest it and communicate it and know, okay, do I need to be worried about this guy? Is he doing too much? Is he doing too little? How do we know? And so just that side of it all has been really good. So it's a little bit of everything in all directions. It's certainly not limited to strength and conditioning, as it were.
So are you in a managerial role?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm certainly part of a staff, certainly a subordinate in some ways, but it's great because my boss, he knows that I have desires and aspirations to be a head guy someday. And so he fosters that development for me. And so he makes it very clear about when you are a head guy, here are some things you got to think about culturally, organizationally, not just writing programs and implementing workouts. There's so much more that goes into it. Here are the meetings you can expect. Here are the figureheads you need to learn about. And here's how you talk to donors. And it's all over the place. It's so much more than I ever thought when I was in the private sector before being in it now.
And so, Cam, you said that your boss is also then the assistant head coach of the football team.
Yeah.
So does that mean then that the sport practice is looking a bit different than, say, that you from other programs that you know, or even say from Indiana where you were before?
Yeah, I would say his influence is greater than what I had seen at other places, where he certainly doesn't tell coaches what to do, but he's able to provide recommendations based on his area of expertise. And so he's very good, exceptional really, at understanding global loading and allostatic loads. And in season, he's a wizard. When we are in the competitive period of the year, he truly is a wizard in how he's able to understand that sport is the main thing and we need to let that be the thing. And so the greatest training dose and training prescription the players are going to receive in his mind should be sports practice and the game itself, if you were to think of the actual game as being a form of training, which it is. And from there, he manipulates what we do and adapts what we do. But at the same time, he's very good about communicating with the coaching staff from an educational standpoint of, if we're doing this, this, and this, here's what you might expect, or these might be considered loads that are a bit excessive. And I'm not going to tell you to change what you're doing, but maybe just restructure it in a certain way so that we can change the density of it, or whatever it might be, the intensity, any of the factors involved, or how can we get the volume to be down a little bit, but still get the skill acquisition side that we want. And so what's great about him, going back to fostering my growth as a practitioner and what I want to do next, is he will get the initial practice plan from the coaches and he'll bring it to me and he'll say, let's look this over together and let me know what you're seeing. Let's talk about it. Here's what I'm thinking. Anything that you see that pops out to you that I need to bring back to them. And so I'm really grateful that he does that, because it's a cool learning experience. Day one, I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. Yeah, I've never done this before. Right. But over time, you start to pick up on the patterns of it and start to understand it, especially when you're looking at the reports that come out of it. And it's cool. It's just a really cool learning experience for me.
Yeah, the concept of the game actually being training, I love that. You don't hear enough people saying that, because that's the main stimulus that you're trying to adapt from too. Like you're working towards it, but I mean, there's no better training than exactly what you're supposed to be doing, to prepare you for what you're going to be doing as well. I really like that take. All right. So you seem to have your hand in a lot of honeypots, and there's a lot of things that you're supposed to be doing. Now, when you were with Indiana, and even prior to Indiana, you were knuckle deep with the 1080 data.
Mm-hmm.
And are you still doing work with the 1080 now?
Yeah. We're really fortunate here because we got here day one, and we actually have a brand new facility. So they built a whole new building, and so we are the first football staff, from the head coach and everybody, to be in this building. So we got into it in the beginning of 2023, and we had to go clean out the old facility in order to move things into the new one. And we opened up the closet, and there were 5 1080 sprints in there.
in the fucking closet.
Right in the closet. Yeah. So we said, okay, we can do something with these. And so, yeah, we use it heavily. And it's been a huge part of our off season. And my journey with it has been trying to find simpler ways to use it, in terms of, can we get data every time we do a rep, and can we keep it simple and find ways to progress it, or see if there's progression happening. And I think a lot of people buy the device, and it can do almost anything you want it to do in a horizontal plane. And you can even rig it up to do something in the vertical if you have the right they have that little pulley mat and things like that. But from the standpoint of just how much it can do, I think it's intimidating for a lot of people. Where for me, I'm like, I want to use it to get my guys faster. I mean, ultimately, that's what are we doing? That's it. It's just, how can I help our players gain performance in the horizontal plane? And that's the way I see it. And what are some of the ways that can be the simplest ways to do that? And so that's where I'm at with it, is trying to figure those out, and just some better training, prescriptive doses to use it, And I think it's just, there's not a lot of people that are using it too well, in my opinion. And so just all the years I've been exposed to it, I think I've just really simplified my approach with it over time, because I feel like then I can actually have an understanding of what I'm getting out of it to some degree.
So walk me through your approach. To me, the only thing you use the assisted sprinting with would be top speed. However, I was talking to Rolf Oman about it, and he's the inventor of the 1080, and I had suggested, how about we use the assisted for acceleration for the first step? Because what do you want your guys at first step? And are you going first step out of the 2-point, in which case, like, the wave is kind of like blended, so you can't really tell the difference between the back foot and the front foot, right? So what are the metrics you're looking at with that?
Well, to keep it simple, right now we're essentially, the goal that we've put in place for ourselves this past summer was, can we just find something that's relatively light load, and then can we find something that's relatively moderate and something that's relatively heavy, and just, can we keep it that simple, where we're just going to use those loads. And what I love about the 1080 now is that after every trial, they just tell you the highest speed that you hit. And so let's keep it really simple for our athletes. The higher the number, the better, And so, and they now have imperial metrics in their software, which is big time for us, cavemen over here in the West. And so we can tell them in miles per hour what they hit. And so we just said, okay, let's just take, let's say, 8 kilograms of load, which to me, because that just, for us, that was somewhere around a 20% decrement in velocity. So it was like kind of light to moderate. And so when we just tested everybody at that load, we were like, all right, it's going to be somewhere around 20-30% velocity decrement in terms of max speed.
So max speed in what distance?
Just the highest speed you can hit. And
so that's even for top speed, like even 40 meters.
Correct. So like in theory, like the highest speed I can hit, it's going to be, if I do 8 kilograms for 15 yards, once I pass through 15 yards, I might be somewhere around 70 to 80% of my unloaded, just top speed. That's what we found. So, for example, we have a lot of our guys can hit like 16 to 17 miles per hour, our faster guys on there. And they're probably running 21 to 22 miles per hour unloaded as their true maximum speed. And so I'm not going to do the math right here just on the spot, but it does end up being somewhere around that 70-80%-ish range.
Yeah. So let me ask this. Why are you looking at it from a 15-yard standpoint? Tell me how you came up with these numbers. I want to understand that better. How did you come up with those?
A lot of it was just experience. So it's not necessarily based on anything scientific. It's just been, well, some of it is in terms of looking at velocity decrements. And the way I think of velocity decrement is no different than putting weight on a bar in the weight room. Like if I have 100% velocity decrement, I'm pushing against an immovable wall. So that's like my maximum force capability in the horizontal direction is essentially I have no speed. If I have a 10% velocity decrement, that's like about as light as I could possibly get. That's like basically doing an unloaded jump or having 10% of load on the bar and jumping with it. So I just think of velocity decrement as sort of an inverse to percent 1RM, if you will. And so, so when I'm talking about I want to be at like 70 to 80% max velocity, that's a 20 to 30% velocity decrement. If I just want it to make sense for listeners and or watchers or whoever's looking. And so I just wanted to say what's something that's fairly light, something moderate, something heavy. And so when you look at research from JB Marin, who's my PhD supervisor, heavy to him is like a 50% velocity decrement or higher, because 50% is going to be somewhere around your load of max power, which is it's similar to something in the weight room, right? And so to me, I just said, okay, let's look at approximately the speeds that these guys are hitting and what are the common loads associated with those decrements. And so that's how we got the actual overload in terms of 8 kilos on the 1080. We'll use 14 kilos on the 1080 if we want more of a moderate load. And so the distances at which we sprint, though, that came about through experience. And so we had a semester where we went 8 kilos for 20 yards, and we were doing those with a lot of intent. We were giving the players feedback after every single rep. And it's great because we have 5 of them, right? So we never have more than 6 guys at a 1080 at any time because we can service 30 players at a time that way, which is amazing. And so we can give them biofeedback after every single sprint. You know, here's what you hit. And what I do is I make a chart with each guy's name on it. And it has, here's your PR and here's 95% of your best. Because I just, simplicity wise, I always go back to the Charlie Francis idea. If you can be above 95%, you're trending in the right direction. Right. And so you're not going to be able to set a PR every single day, but you can still try to be above 95% of your best every single day. And what we found is that they're almost always above 95%. And they set PRs more frequently than you think when you first introduce it, which is great. But the distances, we used to go 8 kilos for 20 yards and 14 kilos for 15. And we shortened them by 5 yards this past summer just because of the feedback we were getting from players when we looked at the totality of everything else we're doing, like our true max velocity work, our unloaded sprint work, our flats, our hills, all of that. And we were just getting a lot of feedback with tightness in the hamstrings, the posterior chain, and hip flexor tightness, which was just when you watch these guys go and you give them such simple feedback, especially down here where they pride themselves on their speed, like our wide receivers and our defensive backs, they want to be known as being the fastest guy on the team, more so than anyone we ever had when I was at Indiana. It's just the desire to be fast down here. They get it and understand why it's important to their game. So it's hugely competitive and the intent is off the charts, which is great. But as a result of that, we just started getting feedback from guys about, I'm going so hard and so fast. It's tough for me to do that because our team recycles players in terms of freshmen every year, and the transfer portal now, you have huge recycling of teams. And a lot of people are not asked to sprint as much or as hard as we ask our guys to sprint. It's different for them. They've done running, they've done striding, but true sprint training as going as hard as you can or trying to be above 95% every time we tell you to sprint. They're not used to that. And so we just played it safe and we said, let's shorten it by 5 yards. And so let's go 8 kilos for 15, 14 kilos for 10 yards. And that's what we ran for the last 8 weeks in summer. And it was way better in terms of people complaining about tightness or anything like that. And the intent was off the charts. And we were able to see, we had anywhere from at least 10 to 15 PRs every time we took the 1080. And it was different people, different week and all of that. But it was just, the intent behind it was phenomenal. And that's a huge component to it for me, because I've been places where they don't really care about being fast. And it sounds shocking, but they're like, I don't need to run my routes full speed. We actually had that problem here last year with some of the players that were left over, where this year, the way they attack the speed training is completely different and the results are completely different. And so it's not rocket science, I guess, but that's a huge factor, I think, with speed training, is that if they don't want to train to be fast, they're not going to get there, because they don't understand what it really means to push the CNS that far in terms of sprinting as hard as I can. I mean, there's a reason why it's such an intense human activity, as both of you know, of course.
So, all right, when Rolf was talking to me about now he's dealing with high performance, so it's substantially different than our demographic. Like the difference between what we have and what Rolf has, right? Like it's really night and day. And he suggests that anything more than a 20% decrease in speed for acceleration, it ruins acceleration for high performance. Now, I get it, high performance. And technically we're doing high performance for football, but these guys aren't elite sprinters. So I think I think I agree with you on the 30% range, 30% range of being just a little bit more liberal and going a little heavier. And so what's interesting is you noticed, and what I'll end up doing, and I want to hear your thoughts so you can teach me. I do about, I don't know, 70 pounds of chains for 10 yards. Then we'll go 15 kilos on resistance with resisted sprints for 20 yards. And then we'll do unloaded for 20, 30 yards. And that's something I literally just ripped off from Randy Huntington. They'll do a heavy, then they'll do the medium, then they'll do the unloaded. And we'll do 2, 2, and 1. Yeah. And the more inexperienced they are, the more unloaded they need in order to PR. But they, like you said, they're always within 95%. They're always within that. And what I had noticed of doing it, I've only been doing it probably 8 weeks with guys. I don't notice too many with and this is what I love about hills and resisted runs. I don't notice too many hammy issues. I don't notice too many hip flexor issues. When we go unloaded and we go more top speed, that's when I'll notice that. But the loaded stuff, I didn't really notice much of it. But when we hit the 15 kilograms, anything past like 12 meters at first, 10 meters, 12 meters, it was like they were fucking running in place. And you look at the graph, right? You could tell the graph is just flatlined. And it really, I mean, the awesome thing about it, about the resistance, is it exposes the asymmetries. It exposes the weaknesses, whether it's in the hip, in the knee, or in the ankle. You can tell where it is depending on what the graph looks like. But, and I was saying to Rolf, and I just said to Ryan Hopkins on the podcast last week, I was like, the first 4 weeks, it was like, for some reason, I feel like these guys just aren't improving. It's almost, I don't want to say they're getting slower, because they're not getting slower, but it just seems to be flatlined. And then out of nowhere, it broke through. The long term, and then all of a sudden, one of my linebackers, he had the 15 kilogram, and he literally accelerated all the way through 20 meters. And I'm sure he could have accelerated past that. And did he have hammy tightness? He got hammy tightness one time, and that was when we were doing the unresisted, the unloaded sprints. Now, when you do this with these guys, do you allow obviously you allow for adaptation periods, right? Of course, the whole training process is an adaptation period. But do you ever sit there and just be like, no? Have you noticed that sometimes when we do this, it just takes a while for the adaptation, and then boom, they break through a wall? Like, tell me, what do you think of what I explained just now?
Yeah, absolutely. It all makes, yeah, it makes complete sense to me, because what we just did this summer was really fascinating, because what we did was essentially our field template stayed exactly the same for 8 weeks. And what we changed were some distances, some reps, like just some of that stuff. But the actual template, in terms of the flow of the workout, stayed the same. And so what I started doing was making notes on that, because we have all the data from all the 1080 trials. And I wanted to know who made changes, who didn't make changes, who made huge changes, who made small to moderate changes, all of that. And so I'm piecing it together right now, just sort of as an in-house case study, just to look back and see. But I can tell you, just from looking at it, there's all kinds of things that, to someone who just tries to think about things purely logically, it might not make a lot of sense to them. Where some people, they hit their number week 1, never improved after that for 7 weeks, right? Just didn't. And we kept the loads the same the whole time. It was 8 kilos on one day. It was 14 kilos on the other day. And we're doing other training around it. We're doing flat sprints. We're doing hill sprints. We're doing, for the skill guys, we're doing upright, longer, intensive tempo type work, building into more of our build-ups and flies and things like that. So we're doing other work, obviously weight room work, all of that. But some guys, week 1, they hit a number, didn't improve at all. Nothing changed. They were always above 95% of that first number. They just never set another PR the entire time.
Were they all in the same position, the same class? What? Tell me.
That's I'm breaking it down into all those layers right now. So I want to know, if we're looking at our seniors, is their response different than our freshmen? If we're looking at a wide receiver, is it different than a linebacker or a tight end? I want to know all those different layers of how it goes, because even logistically speaking, we would do our warm up, and the big skill or mid skill would come to the 1080s first, while the skill guys are outside doing their more velocity stuff. And then they would sort of rotate, where now the mid skills go to the hill as the skill guys come in. So even the flow of, okay, how many big skill guys or mid skill guys improved versus skill guys, did the flow have something to do with it? So I'm trying to investigate all of these different layers that go into it. And, but what was funny is, you think to yourself, low hanging fruits all the time. Okay, this guy's really not fast. So if we get him to just go as fast as he can twice a week on some of these speed workouts, we should see some really good changes with him in speed. And the guy who's super fast right now, he's probably about where he's going to be. But when you look at all the numbers and all the people together, there's plenty of cases where literally the fastest guy on our team is one of our defensive backs. He's the fastest guy, like a 4.3 40 type of guy. He PR'd almost every week. And he had one of the biggest improvements of anybody in terms of how many miles per hour he was able to exert against both 8 kilos and 14 kilos. And so you think, okay, if there's sort of this drop off at some point where he's not going to be able to get faster, then he should be about where he's at. He's the fastest guy on the team. He had like the biggest improvement of anybody. And so to me, I'm like, there might be some sense of sensitivity to speed training based on people that are just more wired for it as well, versus this other guy who maybe doesn't have the muscle fiber architecture, makeup, or I don't know. I can't do biopsies on these guys. Obviously, I wouldn't even know how to interpret all that anyway. But it is fascinating to look at it and think, wow, this super slow guy just stayed slow, even with all this speed training, and this really fast guy kept getting faster, and everybody else is sort of somewhere in between. It's all over the map. So exactly what you're saying. And then I'm making a note of when they hit their best time or best speed. Was it week 3? Was it week 7? Was it week 5? Because I want to know, like, where did most people peak in terms of their performance with this? Like JB Marin had a really good paper on resisted sprinting, where he said a lot of studies do pre-testing, they do the intervention, then they do post-testing, and they say, okay, guys improved or they didn't. Where he did a study one time where they did post-testing, and then they kept post-testing every week to see, was there a residual training effect? And he found that a lot of people post-testing really hit their peak somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks after that initial post-testing period, when the resisted training had been stopped, there was a cessation of that work. And so exactly what you're saying, there could be this bounce back, this delayed effect that comes 2 to 4 weeks after you get rid of doing the resisted sprint training. And so it really is fascinating, because there's some practitioners like Les Spellman's a good example. He'll do a big 1080 protocol with players in the off season, and then during training camp they'll go away from it, and that's like your 2 to 4 week period of getting away from it. And then by game 1 he'll start to reintroduce it again in certain doses. But by then, in theory, is there a delayed effect that's going on at that point where we can now keep rising and going up the staircase? It's all theoretical, but I'm just trying to take the numbers down so I can slowly start to understand the trends a little bit better and understand the stats behind it.
So with the, it's interesting with some of the weighted ball programs for baseball players that I've seen, the weaker guys, the guys that throw that, can't break a pane of glass, right? Like they need the lighter ball. And the guys that start throwing hard, they don't make improvements until they start using the heavier ball. And I think Bondarchuk noticed that with his guys. Like the only thing that actually improved his shot put guys or his hammer guys is when they used the sport specific exercises with the heavier ball, right? And once you get elite, the only thing that gets you better is doing your sport with an increased degree of difficulty to it. So the guy that protocol that you use, where you're using contrast and I use contrast, right? That's something that Randy Huntington does with his elite track guys. So the fastest guy on the team got faster because that's an advanced protocol. Whereas if you do that contrast training with a guy that's a total slap, like, well, slow just keeps moving fucking slow, just keeps moving fucking slow, So, I mean, and you would think like, hey, like the Charlie Francis, like medium intensity, early on in GPP, everything's dog shit. So it doesn't matter what you do. So this guy should theoretically get better if we're doing all this advanced speed training, but maybe it's just too slow for the improvement. Do you notice that your slower guys, your slower guys didn't get faster more so than your faster guys got faster?
I have to go back and just look at it a little bit more in detail. But one of the things I notice, I guess, to Rolf Omen's point, is specifically with your skill players who are supposed to be your fastest on paper. They're your perimeter players. You can become muddled as to who is a high performer when you look at the numbers when the loads are heavier. And so some of the slower guys who are not true velocity oriented guys can actually perform decently well if you have, say, 14 kilos on the 1080. And as soon as you put them on 8 kilos, those same guys are nowhere to be found. I mean, they are nowhere on the map. And then there are these true speed guys who are actually, to use the term wired, like Dan Paff says, they're just wired for the speed and the velocity. They show up. Like the lighter the load gets, it's like, oh, okay, this is like the actual fast guys are now coming about. And so I think there's something to what Rolf said about going too heavy all the time. And JB will say it too. JB Marin's the guy now who's really researching these heavier loads and the potential positive effects of them. And for him, it's basically, he just looks at it as it's horizontal strength training. Like that's the way he looks at it. It's horizontal strength and power training, or force and power training. He's like, if you think that you can just go 50% velocity decrement all the time and you're just going to magically get faster, it's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. All it can do is potentially provide some form of activation or feedback or sensory feedback of some sort that can now help the athlete understand how to apply force a little bit more horizontally. But when you're talking about speed, like real speed, unloaded past 15 to 20 yards, that's just neurologically, that is just something that's so different than a heavy prowler push or any of these heavier sprinting type protocols. And so while there's some benefits to be had there from a force production and force capability standpoint, I do find that if all you're doing is these heavier loads all the time, you might think, wow, this guy's actually a pretty high performer. We can consider him to be a decently fast guy on the team. Well, get rid of the load and you'll see he might not even be anywhere in the picture. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where my head's going now, is trying to understand just the CNS better, to go back, like rewind the tape, get away from all the trends of all these fancy metrics and kilograms and all that stuff. And let me just think about, how does the damn nervous system function and how can I make it function better? And so that's a lot of the lessons I'm learning from Bush Exnator, Dan Paff, going back, reading Charlie's work, all these people. So you look like you want to say something, Brooker.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you're saying about you want to learn more about the CNS, but at the same time, beforehand you said about all the different sprint sessions that you're doing. So how does the week look like then? How is it structured? Are you doing multiple different sprint drills in the same day, or is it high low based approach? Like, what does the week look like?
More or less, it is a high low approach in what we do here. Where your quote unquote low days are going to be our team run days. And so I certainly wouldn't call them, it's not like just a low intensity day where I'm sort of just freely doing tempos and then I do some abs and things like that, where I think a lot of people that read Charlie Francis, they think that's what they need to do on these tempo days. But I just think of it as you have intensive days and extensive days. And so you have days that are all about intensity and days that are all about volume. And so that's basically how we break it up. So on our team run days, it's all volume. It's all about just extensive work capacity, building the specific endurance related qualities for what we need to do in the game. And so that's a huge variety of different activities that are going on between our warm-up activities and then our true work capacity stations. And then they are now allowed to have time with coaches, which they were never allowed to do in the past. And so the rules are changing every 6 months, it seems, in college football. And so we strategically build that into the session too, where now they're doing more extensive actual skill development work with their position coaches. And so now that's almost skill endurance on those days. Whereas on the other days, and in the weight room, it's exactly what you might think from a typical 4-day high-low split, where we're emphasizing upper body on those days. So one day is more of a max effort type of upper body where we're actually doing some benching. And then the other day is strictly just pump type work, hypertrophy type work for the upper body, which is always a great day.
Love it. Love it.
The other 2 days are our true intensive days. So things are of very, very high intensity. And Dom, again, to his credit, really gives them full rest between every sprint trial. And so how do you
quantify full rest? Do you guys have heart rate monitors on them? Are you going to Charlie?
We're doing we're doing the classic 30 seconds to a minute between efforts. And the way that we do it is really just by utilizing a lot of waterfalls. So like one guy goes, the next guy goes when he's 5 yards in. Like it's not the whole line going at the same time. Or if we do a situation where it is that, there might only be like 3 guys up and there's a long line of people behind them. And so we try to do our best of putting them in longer lines of people, so that to the naked eye, it's like, oh, first group goes, it's not just a bunch of guys standing around doing nothing, but it's strategically set up that way so that they get more rest. And then on the 1080s, it's great because with the time it takes you to do a sprint, I tell you your sprint, you're coming back. I'm telling the other guy to get set. By the time he's back around for his next rep, it's been at least 2 minutes, if not 3. And so now you've got time to go again. And so, but what's nice on those days is that our actual reps are always going to be a little bit lower because quality's the emphasis of the day. But when we tell you to go, we want you to go freaking as hard as you possibly can. There's times where we don't want you to do that. If we're working truly technique, to Brooker's point, if we're doing some part of the workout itself is devoted to technical work and just rhythm and understanding that, I don't want you to go as hard as you can. I want you to get the rhythm down. I want you to think about the positions that you're in and all of that. But when we ask you to fly, we need you to fly. Same thing in the weight room. If we ask you to jump, I need you to hit your freaking head on the ceiling. So we try to get them to understand that there are times where I want you to go as hard as possible And then there are other times where we're going to take care of you and we're going to make sure that we tone it down as coaches. We're not in your face spitting on you or something like that, but we're going to make sure that it's everything in between. So, but yeah, to break up the week, it's as simple as that. Some days are intensive, some days are extensive. The weight room on the intensive days are going to be lower body emphasis, loaded ballistics. Sometimes we'll use Olympic derivatives, lower body training. It's pretty much what you would expect from a typical 4-day high-low type of split.
Cool.
Yeah,
What kind of
it's
duration are these sessions then too? Because do you get the luxury of training them you can make a session 3 hours long if you want, or is there certain rules in college?
Yeah, there are rules. So we have a certain weekly limit of hours that we're allowed to spend with them. So typically with us, we won't have them for any more than 2 hours at one time. And that's including all the field training and the weight room training together. And so, yeah, it'll never be more than 2 hours. And then there's some days where we lift them in the morning on the extensive days, and then we would do our team runs in the afternoon to get them in the heat. So we start getting some heat acclimation going on, and they loved that, especially down here in Alabama. But we had to explain to them it's necessary. If you guys don't do this, apparently a couple of years ago here, they didn't do that. Like they always ran them in the morning, and there was no heat acclimation really for the summer training. And then they went out day one of training camp, and it was just IVs everywhere, like bodies everywhere. Just get this guy hydrated, save him. He's cramping everywhere. And so, yeah, we don't want to have to deal with that. So,